Okay, so I think people are starting to drop in now.
Pretty good.
It's always good when you can see names popping up and you know they're there. And the ID's held out. So that's all good. So I'll just wait for everybody to join us and then I'll get going. That's some good familiar names as well. Oh, we've got somebody from Brazil there as well. So we've got a little international audience today. That's good.
Right.
Rhinus from Brazil. So a couple of other authors as well. So yeah, we've got a good turnout today. That's great. It's really
pretty good.
Right. Okay, so I shall get going. Right, so hello and welcome everybody. I'm Becca Harding and I'm chairman of the Society of Women Writers and Journalists. And this is another in our up close and personal series of interviews, and it's great to have you all joining us. So today I'm thrilled to be talking to Sir Tim Rice, who we're also lucky enough to have as patron of the Society. Sir Tim was knighted for his services to music in 1994. He has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, is a Disney Legend recipient, and is a fellow of the British Academy of Songwriters, Composers and Authors. In addition to his awards in the UK, he is one of the only 16 artists to have won an Emmy, Oscar, Grammy and Tony in the US. So he's collaborated with many different artists, with Andrew Lloyd Webber on shows such as Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, Jesus Christ Superstar and Evita, with Bjorn and Benny of ABBA, with whom he wrote Chess, and with Disney on Aladdin and the Lion King. I've been amazed learning of all the other things he's done as well, which I just didn't even know about, including the theme tune for the James Bond film Octopussy, It's Easy for You with Elvis Presley, The Fallen Priest and Golden Boy from Freddie Mercury's Barcelona album. And he's worked on radio, the BBC and in production. Tim, I'm feeling really inadequate here. We'll have a question and answer session at the end. So if you have any questions for Tim, there's a Q&A button at the bottom right-hand side of the screen. So please post your questions there. So thank you so much for coming to talk to us. How are you doing? And you're just back from your dog walk as well.
Yep, just back from walking the dog. I'm in Cornwall and tier 1, I hate to rub that in, or I'm in Cornwall and it's quite a nice day today. Sun was out briefly. Dog behaved badly on the walk. That was the highlight of my day so far until now.
obviously.
Yes.
We know you've been looking forward to it.
Mm.
So your mum was a member of our society. So tell us about her and did she inspire you with your writing?
Well, I suppose I get my enthusiasm for writing from her. She was a member of the society for a long time, and she wrote mainly articles. She began by, I mean, it's a sort of sideline because, you know, she was a full-time housewife and mother, which you were allowed to be in the 1950s, and she had three brats, me and my 2 brothers, to look after. And my father was often away abroad in the 50s, so it was quite tough for her when we lived on a rather remote farmhouse near Hatfield in Hertfordshire, in between Hatfield and St Albans. And she didn't really have as much time as she wanted to write, but she was rather good. She wrote a lot of short stories for magazines, often under a variety of strange names. And she wrote articles for the Times and for Punch, and she was on the BBC once or twice. So it was really a hobby, and it brought her in a sort of pocket money, really. I mean, she'd probably get 5 guineas for an article and maybe 20 guineas or, you know, 25 quid for a piece in She or, you know, one of these women's magazines. And it was great fun, and she was good at it. I mean, she never really got round to writing a book, but she did keep diaries. And when she was in the war, she kept a diary from, I mean, I think she kept a diary from a very young age, but she kept a beautifully written diary from the beginning of the war right the way through to the end of the war, or rather certainly until she met my father and they got married in Egypt in 1942. And her diaries were published when she was 80, because my daughter Eva, who's also a writer and has written several novels, Eva's agent, my mum said to Eva, read these, you know, nobody else had actually seen them in the family, not even me or my brothers. And Eva said, these are jolly good, Gran. Why don't I show them to my agent? She did. And her agent thought they were brilliant. And And then about a week later, my mother was offered 15,000 quid advance. And I said, wow, it's fantastic. And but the agent said, no, 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 we can get more than this. And there was a bidding war. And she ended up getting £60,000 up front, and it was serialized in the Daily Mail. And the books did quite well, or the book did quite well. The diaries, I mean, they're very readable. And it's called Sand in My Shoes. And I think it's still available. And we were all thrilled in the family that she kind of had her writing skills recognized on a reasonable scale. I mean, it sold well. And she even got herself, quite rightly, a very nice obituary in the Telegraph. Or was it the Times, or was it both? I can't remember. But I felt it was rather nice that she got established and recognized for what she was good at. Well, she was good at many things. She was good at bringing us up, for starters.
An underestimated skill, I think.
Underestimated skill, absolutely. But to have a literary success aged 80 was terrific, and she died when she was nearly 90, so she had 10 years of fame,
basking in her glory,
and on just the right level of fame. It wasn't, you know, annoying where, you know, people pester you all the time. She was just very happy with what she'd achieved.
Oh, that's lovely. That's a really nice story. So when you were young, when you were her bratty teenager at home, you were part of a top band called Aardvark, I understand. So is that where you started your writing career? Writing songs?
There's a couple of things I need to correct there. One, it was not a top band. It was.
I'm joking.
It was a remote. Yes, it was a very unsuccessful band, but we played. Cliff Richard and the Shadows were the big stars. This is pre-Beatles in the early 60s, and Cliff and the Shads were, quite rightly, top of the tree in those days. And we formed this pop group, and we used to do, every time a new Cliff Richard record came out or a new Shadows record came out, we'd try and learn them as quickly as we could, and performed at school dances. We weren't really that talented, but we were quite funny, and we had a really good lead guitarist, guy called Pete Remine. I'm still in touch with all the band, actually except the drummer. We didn't know what happened to him. The best thing, and we were called the Aardvarks because we wanted to be top of any bill that was alphabetical. Yeah. There was actually in the 70s, I think, a group called just Aardvark, which obviously had the same idea of being at the top of a bill. But by then, the Aardvarks, who were wildly ahead of the game.
Well, obviously.
We disbanded, but I did organize a reunion for the Aardvarks and the Shadows, because I got to know the Shadows very well when I was working at EMI Records and working for Norrie Paramore, who was their producer. And Bruce Welch and Brian Bennett of the Shadows are great friends of mine to this day. Hank would be, but he lives in Australia. And Cliff and the Shads did it's just the Shadows on that one. The Shadows did a farewell tour some time ago. It must have been, I would say, even 15 years ago now, but they were brilliant and huge turnout. And because I knew Bruce and Brian particularly, I invited all the Aardvarks, and afterwards the Aardvarks and the Shadows had a Indian nosh together in Solihull.
And Solihull, where else?
No, actually, no. Solihull was where Pete. That was where we had an Aardvarks dinner. I think the dinner was in Nottingham. I can't remember anyway, but it was.
I used to hang out having curries in Solihull.
but the Aardvarks met the Shadows, and two great groups together. It was wonderful. Great evening. The Aardvarks. I keep saying to the lads, we ought to do one more gig, but there hasn't been much of a demand. And also, all our repertoire dates from 1961.
Oh, it's very popular still. Frankly, I think you should do it for us.
A major plus. If you want to hear Apache and Please Don't Tease, that's the place to go.
Excellent, excellent. So did you write any songs for them at all, or
not really? No, we didn't. I used to write a few silly poems and one or two comic things, which occasionally made the school magazine. But I never really. I don't think we wrote any songs at that point. But I picked up a few basic chords on the guitar from Pete Remine, who really could play. And shortly after leaving school, I began strumming. And began trying to write my own tunes and sticking lyrics on them. And I recorded 3 songs I'd written, words and music, on a reel-to-reel tape recorder, and sent it off to Tony Hall, who was a disc jockey, and he'd been to my school, Lancing College. He was quite a way ahead of me, but he was the only person I knew in the music business, or I didn't even know him. I knew of him.
Yeah.
And I said, this is a blatant attempt to use the old school tie. And he very kindly, probably thought I was pretty awful, but he very kindly organized an audition with a Decca A&R man, and we re-recorded the songs at quite good quality with a little bit of piano added in as well, so the demos weren't too bad. And I hadn't written, I hadn't made the tape to sell my songs because I didn't think I was a songwriter. I wanted to sell my voice as a singer, and frankly, I obviously wasn't good enough but I then sent copies of this tape round to all the record companies, and no one really responded enthusiastically. But I got a call from a music publisher about a month later, having more or less written it all off. And I was working in the law at the time. I was a failed law
I was good. I know. I was going to ask you about that.
Failing law student. I hadn't actually failed at that point, but I was well on the way to failure. And I got this call from a music publisher, and they're the guys who look after the songs rather than the artists and the records. Yeah. And the music publisher said, I've been sent this tape by a record company, and I think the songs are quite good, and it's got your name on it. Did you write the songs? And I said, well, actually I did. And I said, what did you think of the singer? And he said, oh no, we didn't think he was any good. So I said, no, I agree with you, but we've got rid of him, but it's the songs I'm trying to sell. And they said, well, we're going to record one of them. And they did record one with a pop group called The Night Shift. And although it wasn't a hit, it meant I had my name on a record, which in those days, that was something. I mean, it was a total flop, but I've still got it. I had a 45 RPM single record with my name in small print under the title. And nowadays, anybody can make a record, anybody can make a CD, you can download anything. And in a sense, you've made a record. But in those days, to make a record, you had to get somebody else to like it. So,
different.
But I still, and I then tried to get a job, well, not a job, but I auditioned singing with 1 or 2 rock bands, and I was all right. I wasn't too bad, but it wasn't until I joined EMI Records, when I gave up the law, recognizing I was a disaster, that I actually began to make progress. And then I met Andrew Lloyd Webber, and he wanted to write for the theatre, which I'd never crossed my mind.
Yeah. So when you went to work, you went in as an admin assistant, didn't you? So you clearly just took a job to get yourself into the industry. Is that right?
Yeah. So, well, I was a management trainee, which means sort of glorified office boy. But it was interesting because you were in the music business, and EMI was the biggest company in the world at that time, even including American companies. In fact, they owned Capitol Records in America, and they had the Beatles, and that was really it. That was it. That's it. And everything in the mid-60s, when people say to me since then, well, you know, One Direction or Oasis or the Spice Girls are bigger than the Beatles, they weren't anywhere near as big as the Beatles. I mean, the only act the Cliff and the Shadows were big, but the Beatles were bigger. And the only act that came near the Beatles really from Britain was the Rolling Stones, and they were about the same time. But the Beatles were absolutely massive. And the entire EMI company seemed to be running around every 3 months. There'll be a new Beatles single, and it was like how many weeks to the next single and the next album. It was so exciting because they were incredibly good. And I was running around various departments. I was in the record cover department. I was in the promotion department, you know, just learning about the business, and it was very helpful. And when I got into the A&R department, which is the exciting one where you actually make the records, I was lucky enough to be asked by Norrie Paramore, who was head of the A&R. He was the guy who actually produced all Cliff and the Shadows records. And I think because I knew so much about Cliff and the Shadows, he signed me up as his PA. So
but you could sing all their songs, because you
I could sing them all, and the B-sides. So I was very lucky. And then Norrie left EMI to go independent, and I went with him. And so I was, and by that time I was writing with Andrew, and we were trying to write shows, but we also wrote 1 or 2 pop songs, which didn't really get anywhere, but they got recorded. That was something.
and it's all experience, isn't it? It's just
Yeah,
trying things out and practice and so on. So you said somewhere that you owed Angus McGill a lot. There was a story about a competition with Angus McGill.
Well,
What was that?
Yeah, well, Angus McGill was a lovely man. He became a very good friend. And I spoke at his memorial service, which was a great honor. He was an Evening Standard journalist, and he did a lot of things on the Evening Standard, mainly on the culture side or social. He was a very funny writer. And he organized a thing which now would be politically incorrect, called the Evening Standard Girl of the Year. You couldn't have that now. I mean, you know, it's shocking. But every year they would ask, I mean, people could write in and recommend a young lady who would be the Evening Standard Girl of the Year, and then she would go around the country, or around London anyway, promoting the Evening Standard indirectly by, you know, they would take her to Ascot, they take her to, you know, Wimbledon or whatever, and the Chelsea Flower Show, and you know, it was a good running story.
Sounds great, actually. Well,
and yeah, you would have been a shoo-in for Evening Standard Girl of the Year.
I like you, yeah.
And it was 1967, and they used to announce the girls. The 6 finalists were announced in March, roughly, and then punters had to vote. And they said, you can vote as many times as you like, but you've got to have a copy of the Evening Standard with each vote. So it was a cunning wheeze to make you buy 5 copies rather than 1. Well, Andrew and I went to the Evening Standard offices because we knew that a lot of papers would get binned that hadn't been sold. And we, in those days, there was no security. We went into Fleet Street quite late one night and nicked about 2,000 or 3,000 copies of the Evening Standard, put them in a van.
I thought you were going to say hundreds, not thousands.
No. Actually, I forgot to mention that. No, I forgot to mention that one of the candidates was a singer called Ross Hanneman. They were all lovely ladies. I mean, they all looked great. But this one, Rosalind, as her real name, was a singer, and she was doing a few gigs in London. And we went to see her, and she was really quite good. You know, she was a sort of Marianne Faithfull type singer. And we thought, if we can, I say, well, I'm from EMI Records, I'm very important, which was, the first part was true. And I said, I'd be very interested in signing you up for a record deal. And she said, wow. So I then went to the boss at EMI, which actually at that point wasn't Norrie. It was just before I'd actually signed up fully to Norrie. And I said, look, I've this wonderful lady, we should make a record with her because the publicity will be phenomenal. And he said, well, yeah, if she wins it, you can sign her up. And of course, so she had to win it. And, you know, she might have won it legitimately. Actually, she wouldn't. She would have come second because we then went off and got these 3,000 illegal votes. We were up all night with her and her managers and Andrew and I filling in forms, you know, Ross Hanneman, Ross. In the end, we just, you know, you had to give a reason each time, which was a bit difficult, you know. So it began with a sort of two sentences saying wonderful human being, blah, 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 and ended up with saying great. And then at the very end, just an exclamation mark. But we did send 3,000 roughly votes, and we dumped them on Angus's desk in the morning, about 7 o'clock the following morning. And we said, please feel free to count these, but we can assure you they're all votes for Ross Hanneman in a plastic bag. And he was, I mean, first I think he was rather annoyed because he felt it contravened the spirit of the competition, which it certainly did. But there again, it was their fault for saying you could vote as many times as you liked. And the very nice girl called Jenny, who'd actually won it in the sense, without Ross's votes, she would have won it. And Ross won it with all our votes, but they decided to have 2 Evening Standard Girls of the Year, as you know, they announced it as a tie, which was great. And EMI then kind of had to sign Ross up, and we made a couple of records with her of songs written by me and Andrew. But you know, they got a bit of publicity, but they didn't do very well. But it was fun seeing how the record business worked. Excuse me.
Yeah, no,
and Angus became a good mate, and over the years, you know, he wrote lots of pieces about what we were up to, and he then organized something which was, I don't think, politically incorrect. You know, it's hard to know these days, but the Girl of the Year got shoved to one
I
side.
think anybody knows.
And he started up the Pub of the Year, and he asked me to be the chairman, which was great fun. So once a year, me and Angus and 3 so-called personalities would go around pubs and judge them, and it was great fun.
That's terrible.
We had some lovely people on it. We had, Dennis Compton, the cricketer. Remember, we had Ronnie Wood of the Stones. We had Carol Thatcher, Al Murray, the pub landlord. I mean, over the years, we had Jimmy White, the snooker player. I've probably forgotten, well, I know I've forgotten several, but it was great fun going around the pub every year, 6 pubs every year, and
Find them out.
all paid for by the Evening Standard. We probably spent 100 quid in every pub per head.
You get the worst jobs.
But even that's gone by the board. But I did that for about 10 or 12 years.
Fantastic, that's great. So obviously your career was growing at this point. So when did you really feel that it was starting to take off and things were going really well for you?
Well, by the time I was doing the pub of the year, we was going really well. Well, it was obviously when Superstar, the record, took off. We did Joseph in 1968. Well, first we wrote a musical which didn't get anywhere, which was based on the life of Dr. Bernardo. It had merit, but it wasn't good enough, and it was not very original. And Andrew was working on that before I met him, but I was very enthusiastic about it, but it wasn't quite right, and we were learning our trade. Then we did Joseph for a school, which was not what we intended it to become. We just wrote it for one school, but because it went down so well and other schools did it, it gradually got more and more performances, and we made an album. And that didn't do particularly well, but that album was brought to the attention of a guy called David Land, who became our manager. And he then supported us for 3 years, guaranteed, provided we wrote all day. I mean, or anything we wrote, he would look after and manage. And so I was able, with some trepidation, to give up my job with Norrie Paramore, because I was a bit worried about, us not making it. We had Joseph, which was getting us a little bit of publicity, but Joseph led to us getting a record deal to do Superstar, which was our next idea. And we wanted Superstar to be a show. We had this ambition that, I mean, Andrew was, and still is, desperately keen to write for the theatre. That was his raison d'etre.
What his love. Yeah.
And I was probably more of a record man, to be honest. I still am, I think. I mean, I love a lot of musicals, but something about a record, an album, that I love more than anything else in showbiz. We tried, with David Land's help, we tried to get our idea for a musical about Jesus staged. Nobody wanted to know, oh, terrible idea, this won't work. The only people who wanted to know was a record company, MCA, a small branch of an international company based in Los Angeles and New York. But they had a small London office, and Brown Brolly, who was head of it, said, I like this, why don't we try a single? And if it works, we'll do an album. And if the album works, then we'll have a show. And MCA, we signed up everything to MCA. Well, fair enough, because they were taking a punt on us, and we were making a single, quite an expensive one, because it had an orchestra and a choir and everything on it. And we made the single with Murray Head in 1969. And it didn't take off in England, but it did in other countries. And we began to think, maybe we're onto something here. And then the sales in America of the single, which weren't staggering at that point, but they were good enough. And the American company said, right, well, let's have the album, which they paid for. And we did the album throughout 1970. And when we were recording it, we felt we were doing something right. It sounded good. I still didn't think it would be a hit. I thought, well, it's a bit way out. Yeah. It's a strange idea. But it worked. And when it was released in late 1970, exactly 50 years ago, it came out in England. And again, it didn't do very much. It got 1 or 2 good reviews, some quite good press, but the radio didn't play it. There was only really Radio 1 in those days that could have played it, and they didn't really play it very much. Alan Freeman did, but no one else did, really. And then suddenly it was released in America, and we went over to America thinking, well, it's going to be like England. It's obviously not going to work. But when we got to America, we'd barely landed at the airport when we were aware that it was different, because they'd changed the packaging. We were met by a fairly senior chap, not by some office lad like me. They said, well, we've got all these interviews, we've got Time, we've got Newsweek, we got Life, we got, this, that, and the other. And we thought, blimey. And it came out, went straight into the charts, and was #1 in the new year. It was in about 4 weeks, and it was a massive record. And we still hadn't got a show. And today, quite understandably, people don't realize that was how we did it. We did it by mistake. We were hailed as marketing geniuses to put out an album first, because we had a hit, musical without a show, which was a problem as well, because we then got lots of bootleg versions of it appearing, which Robert Stigwood, David Land signed the show to, or the potential show, because now suddenly everybody wanted to do the show. Oh, well, actually, we think it's a good idea after all. And Robert Stigwood was the producer of the show, and he had to spend more on suing people or stopping people doing illegal versions than he did in financing the actual musical. But it came out as a show a year later, and that was, so in answer to your original question about 4 hours ago,
that was that's great.
That was when we got the message that we were doing all right, when we were #1 on the American charts.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Oh, that sounds like a hit to me, especially as we knocked George Harrison off the top, one of my heroes. And
that's got to be satisfying.
I felt rather guilty about that, because it was interesting, because he had a big hit at exactly the same time with My Sweet Lord, which was also all about religion. And and there was a lot of and Godspell came out, and there were lots of, it was suddenly the rock business discovered God, and it was in many forms. We were looking at Jesus from a human point of view. We weren't making any comment about whether he was God or not, but we were telling his story, which is a incredibly influential story. Obviously, it's Christianity is, to put it mildly, one of the greatest influences of all time. But George was more into Hare Krishna and all that jazz, and Godspell was a much more religious piece than ours. But it was interesting, and even songs like Bridge Over Troubled Water, which came out at the time, were hailed as sort of religious songs, and there was quite a lot of it around, and we caused part of the trend, but also we were lucky to be caught up in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a way you were ahead of it, because of the time it had taken you to write the music.
Yeah, I mean, when we began writing it in late '69, there was none of this happening.
No, absolutely.
So it was all a bit strange. And then John Lennon did Imagine, and I mean, it was very much, I'm not saying John Lennon for a moment said, oh, those guys did Superstar, I'll do Imagine, but it was just it was just something in the air. Something in the air. Thunderclap Newman,
absolutely.
Also 1969.
Well, I was born in 1970, so.
Oh right, well, you would have missed all this wonderful stuff.
I missed it all. Yeah,
you're far too young.
But but I'm interested that you had accusations of it being blasphemous and things like that, and then I know 10 years later you did Life of Brian came out.
Yeah.
You did a Friday night, Saturday morning interview with them where they were accused of being blasphemous. Looking back on it now, what do you think of all that debate and everyone discussing it causing so much scandal? How do you look at it now with hindsight?
I don't think we caused quite as much scandal as Life of Brian, but we certainly had in America quite a few protesters, but they were quite friendly on the whole, and they also hadn't even seen the piece in most cases, so it was fine, and it was good publicity. I mean, when the London show opened, we had protesters outside the theatre. Oh, sorry, someone's on the phone. I've just hung it up, and they'll ring back in a minute. It's a landline. Do you remember them? It's a landline.
Yeah, you still got one.
And but the protesters, I mean, as Robert Stigwood said, that's great. We'll be on the front page, not just on the theatre page. And
yes, absolutely.
And I'll have to go. Excuse me. It's a live. Here. Hello. Yes, I'm in the middle of a very important interview to thousands of people, so I'll call you back. Okay, bye. Taxman. Anyway, where was it? Yes, and of course the people accused us of being blasphemous, which was ludicrous because we weren't making a statement about that, but it helped us in a way. But Life of Brian, again, people who protested totally missed the point, because it was a satire and, if anything, a criticism of people who followed Jesus rather than Jesus himself. And it was saying how people can be blindly, can believe blindly. I'm not saying there's anything wrong at all in being a Christian, but some people who just sort of don't weigh up the pros and cons. They just accept everything, and sometimes you have to question. Really, you should get John Cleese on about this, but I was doing a couple of chat shows at the time, which I was not very good at, but it was quite fun to try and be Parkinson. And I realized what a jolly difficult job it is. It's much easier to be interviewed than to interview. But I was in the chair for this show, and in the first half we had Norris McWhirter, the Guinness Book of Records founder.
Yes, I remember him.
One of my favorite singers, Paul Jones of Manfred Mann, and the actor singer. And in the second half we'd booked the Bishop of Stockwood, Bishop of Southwark, sorry, Mervyn Stockwood, Malcolm Muggeridge, who was a real old grumpy codger of the day, and Michael Palin and John Cleese of Python. And we were going to discuss Life of Brian. And they said, it'll be very interesting that you're in the chair because you can compare it with Superstar, which was 10 years ago. Fine, great. I think I'll be able to actually say something of intelligence here. Unfortunately, the two opposite parties, Stockwood and Muggeridge, calling him Stock. Yes, he was Stockwood, that was his name. Stockwood and Muggeridge and Palin and Cleese went at each other hammer and tongs. And I couldn't really get a word in, which didn't matter. I mean, it was just as well. I was the perfect interviewer in that I didn't interrupt. And I kept thinking, should I now say something if there was a millisecond pause, but there was never a chance to say anything, which didn't matter. And it became a really famous television clip, and it's shown all the time. And there was even a television play based on it. And
really?
somebody acted me, being the hopeless host. And he was called, ironically, Tom Price. I thought, weird, you know, I mean, he was fine. He was quite good as me, I thought. It wasn't a very taxing role. But that was very interesting because I think I did say it once or twice, or that we went through all that, but I don't think Muggeridge or Stockwood had a clue who I was. Why should they really? But I've you know, certainly over the years, I wouldn't say I'm you know, close buddies, but I know both Michael and John moderately well, and they are delightful people, and we've certainly had the odd chat about it over the years. It was. I'm quite glad I was involved with that one.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. So as you became more well known, obviously, did people treat you differently? Did you find it quite hard to get honest feedback about your work? Was there a sort of change in atmosphere and a change in the way that you were responded to by people?
Well, I don't think people who knew me well, like my family and close friends and my cricket friends, they didn't change at all. They, you know, still regarded me as a bit of a twit at times, and you know, were totally honest, and that was great. The difference is that people who you don't know from a bar of soap might come up to you and make some obscure comment, you know, often very friendly, and they often mean well, but and people who you half knew might become a little bit, you know, sometimes a bit sycophantic. But without being falsely modest, I'm not that recognized. I mean, I'm always recognized at Lord's Cricket Ground. That's the one place where I do tend to put on dark glasses if there's a test match on and walk through the crowd pretending I haven't seen anybody. But otherwise, or in the theatres, obviously I get recognized in the theatre occasionally, but I'm not that. I mean, I can walk down the street and people might think, I vaguely know that guy. Was he my, you know, perhaps he was my uncle's best friend or something, but but
they know you, but can't think why.
Yeah, exactly. But I don't know. I think people on the whole are very nice. I mean, you get press, of course, sometimes, you know, making outrageous criticisms or whatever, but that goes with the territory. I mean, after a while, you are vaguely immune to it. I mean, if I read a press story about somebody who I know quite well, then you more or less know it's not that accurate. There's an awful lot that is just not you know, it's slanted.
Yeah, fantasy so much better than reality.
Well, I spoke to my great friend Susie Dent the other day, and she was rather annoyed because somebody had, and quite rightly, somebody had made out that she was supporting the idea of a lack of a full stop, meaning that you were putting in a full stop into a text. I mean, this is weird. People are arguing about this sort of thing, but apparently the millennials or some Generation Z or Generation X or whatever they're called, they find if you put a full stop at the end of your text, that's an insult. Ludicrous.
Really?
Yes.
I'll have to talk to my children about it immediately.
and Susie had a discussion about this and was interviewed about it somewhere, and she said, well, she could see how that could be interpreted, but she wasn't supporting it. And of course, it came out Susie Dent in favor of no full stops. And you thought, oh, you know. So
really, have we not got more to talk about?
well, I was going to say it sells papers, but as papers don't sell very much, it obviously doesn't sell papers these days.
No. Project, which was your favorite piece of work? What's the thing that you've loved and enjoyed the most out of everything?
Oh, I don't know. It's difficult. It's like, who's your favorite kid? I mean, it tends to be the one I haven't heard for the longest time. I mean, looking back on it, I can see that some are better than others. It's the idea. If the idea is good, it often inspires you to do something quite good. I mean, I think Joseph will be the one that will hang around longest, because there's always a new generation of kids coming up and wanting to see it, and it doesn't date in that sense. But Superstar and Evita are still going strong, the ones I did with Andrew, and I think Evita is the more polished work, probably technically the best thing I did with Andrew. But Superstar's got such a great story, which I didn't write. That was Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And then
yeah, give them the credit.
I mean, The Lion King. The Lion King's got some lovely songs, and working with Elton was just magic. Working with Elton John, I don't know, it's difficult. I like chess as well, and chess is quite. I'm very grateful for the Queen's Gambit as inspiring a new interest in chess, which is good.
Oh yes, I've not seen that yet. Everyone keeps talking about it. I must watch it. No, I was singing Evita this morning when I was stalking you online for the interview. Singing at the top of my voice, which is probably not good for the neighbours.
Exactly.
Hopefully they enjoyed it. So what would be your advice for writers and poets perhaps that wanted to get into doing lyric writing?
Well, I think it depends what sort of lyric writing you're doing. I'm not too sure about rock and pop writing, but writing for theatre, if you're trying to write a big piece, which you hope to get staged, it's very hard starting off. I would always say sending out demo discs on the whole doesn't really help. Potential producers get tons of stuff sent to them and they don't really have the time to listen to them. And if they do, it's very hard to get the idea of the whole concept. I mean, there's several great musicals. If you played the first bit, you'd think, well, it's okay. And yet it might be brilliant. And I think the other thing is, so I would say, therefore, get it performed if you can, at any level. We found this out with Joseph. Joseph was done in a school before it was recorded, and we never sent out any demo discs. And he went down so well at the school that other schools did it, and we slowly began to think, well, maybe we've hit on something here. And I would also say, for starting out, apart from obvious things like make sure you rhyme properly for the theatre, I would say make it funny if you can. Not every song, but something that's light and easy to assimilate is usually much more likely to get someone's attention if it's funny. But I mean, the rule is there are no rules, and the other rule is nobody knows anything. So if you know you don't know anything, you're one step ahead of the rest of the people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So when you go about writing something, what's the process? Is it the music, then the lyrics, or the lyrics and the music? The film title, isn't it?
Well, for a show, it is absolutely 100% the story is the first thing. You've got to have a good idea. You've got to have the story so both music and lyrics know what they're writing about. And with Andrew and with Alan Menken, or indeed with Bjorn and Benny, my job was to sort of get the story established, and then having done the story or drafted it out. I mean, it's not necessarily the final exact plot, scene by scene, but it's basically there. Then the composer will be able to write something which fits the scene. So he or she knows that it's got to be dramatic, or a love ballad, or a crowd scene, or whatever, or a rocker, or so they will write the right sort of music, and then I will put the lyrics to that. That's the sort of the
right.
music
Okay.
In the middle of the sandwich: story, music, lyrics. With Elton, story came first with The Lion King or Aida, and then then Elton would, but then the other way around, I would then, having got the story worked out, I would then write lyrics, because Elton always likes lyrics first. He never writes anything without words. So it was that way round. So that was fun, and it was made a nice change for me, because I'd done everything really with tunes that already existed, and it was quite fun to be able to write lyrics without having a tune.
Yeah, I can see it would be refreshing. It sort of takes away the barriers in a way, doesn't it?
I mean, you have to be careful. The thing about music is it has to be concise, or rather, it's. I think well, perhaps I'm getting this wrong, but words ideally should be as concise as possible, to say as much as you can in as few syllables. And the music, if it's direct and not too long-winded or chaotic, the music will force you to be concise. Whereas if you're writing lyrics first, then sometimes you're inclined to start waffling and say, well, I don't have a scansion here, so I can write 9 words instead of 9 syllables, and often it would be better with just 9 syllables. So I gave myself a rhyming pattern or a scansion pattern when writing lyrics on my own. I might change the pattern as I worked on lyrics, but once you've written verse 1, then verse 2 has to fit verse 1 exactly in rhythm.
Yeah, no, I get that. So, I mean, as well as doing the music, you also set up a publisher, the Pavilion Books Publishing House, with Michael Parkinson and Colin Webb. Is that right? And I mean, what made you go on and do that? Because it's quite a side to what you were doing.
Well, that was a long time ago, and Pavilion Books, sad to say, is no more. But Colin Webb is a book publisher, and he was a fan of Evita in particular, and he asked me, who he didn't know, he got in touch with me and said, would I be interested in doing a book on Evita, the story of Eva Peron, and print all the lyrics and this, that, and the other, and explain the story as if it was a historical account. And I was quite glad to do that. And I got to know Colin, and the book came out, did okay. And he said he was at the time working for, Elm Tree Books. And he very much wanted to go out on his own as a publisher. And he'd also done a book with Michael Parkinson, and who I knew a little. And he said to me and Parky, would you like to be co-directors of a new book publishing company? And he'd done a deal, I think, with Michael Joseph to be part of Michael Joseph's empire. But it would be his company, Pavilion Books, and they could, it would be entirely up to him what they published. Michael Joseph kind of had to do it, whatever it was. And we were both keen on that in 1981, I think this was. And Pavilion Books did pretty well for a while. It had 1 or 2 books that were very good sellers, but it ended up being much more a sort of coffee table book. We were doing these lovely books that were printed by, trained printers in remote parts of Italy, and beautifully illustrated, and cost about 50 quid a go. And in the end, we slightly lost interest in it, not in a bad way, but and we sold out our interest in it. And I had to say, we didn't really make much money out of it. It was great fun because I love books.
Yeah, it's fun, isn't it? And the book thing's your mum again, isn't it? Rubbing up on you.
Right.
What are you going to do now? So you're not the sort of guy that sits there quietly in Cornwall not doing anything at all. So what are you up to?
Well, I'm doing a podcast every week. I began it in the first lockdown. I've now done 31 of them. I can't believe it. I've been doing 1 a week. And I
show people much younger that can't do podcasts yet. It's impressive.
Well, it's no, I mean, that's not all I'm doing, but I mean that's been something that's there are no shows running at the moment.
Yeah.
And it's quite short. It's only 20-25 minutes a show, which is great because people can't listen to 2 hours of podcast that easily. And I just chat and play a few songs, and I'm trying on the whole to play the lesser known ones. And I talk a bit like I'm talking to you now, telling a few stories and illustrating it with 1 or 2 songs, most of which I've written myself or with somebody else, obviously. They've gone quite well. I don't know how many people are listening to them, but I've had some nice responses. And there's one I've just put up today, actually, which talks about The Wizard of Oz, which Andrew revived as a stage show at the Palladium in 2011. And I also play the original version of a song in Evita called High Flying Adored, which is a lovely song. The tune is magnificent, but before it was called High Flying Adored in Evita, it was called Down on the Farm. And that was recorded by a very good singer called Maynard Williams, but it wasn't a hit. And it's quite interesting, I think, for theatre fans to listen to original versions of songs that they know, and how different it is, and how a bad lyric or a wrong lyric can stop a tune being a hit. I think for a tune to be a hit, it's got to have words that, I mean, unless it's an instrumental, obviously, but bad lyrics can ruin a good tune, and indeed vice versa.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely spot on. So I mean, your daughter Eva, she's good with her words as well. So she did very well because she won the British Book Award for the best read of the year with The Lost Art of Keeping Secrets.
Yes, that did very well. She's I mean, I was very proud of her. She's a good writer. She's also written a musical, and The Lost Art of Keeping Secrets is now being done as a TV series. So I'm hoping it'll be like Queen's Gambit. And she's written a couple more novels since then, which have done okay, but not as big as that was a really big seller. And so she took a break from it for a bit, and she's coming back with a new novel quite soon, I think. But she's very good. It's not life or death to her in the sense that she's doesn't feel she's got to bring out a new book every 12 months, but she certainly will bring out some more.
Great, that's really good. I'm glad it's doing so well. So, and you've got 7 grandchildren. So, have you got the chance to see them with COVID, or have you missed them and not been seen?
Well, no, I've seen them during the year. I think legally. I mean, certainly in the summer, we were in a family bubble or whatever down here in Cornwall. No, they're in good form. The eldest is 15 and the youngest is 7, I think. So they're all packed into a short period. There's a chance there might be some more eventually, but at the moment I'm having enough trouble remembering not only their birthdays, remembering their names is hard enough.
Yeah, I've got trouble with my 2 children.
How many? We've got 3 children.
2 children.
2, right, 2.
I mix them up with the dogs, you see.
Right. Yeah, the dog as well, yes.
So have you got nice plans for Christmas?
No, nothing planned really. Nothing. I mean, we're not quite sure what we'll be allowed to do, but I'm sure I'll see them at Christmas. We're waiting to hear what the law says. I mean, I'm frankly, I'm fed up with all these restrictions. I think wouldn't have made much difference whatever we'd done really. It's all very, but who knows? I'd hate to be running the shop. It's difficult, and I think certainly it hasn't been looked after superbly. But I don't think anybody could have controlled it. I mean, it's been so unpredictable and such an unusual thing to happen, and it kicks everything else into touch. But you just have to wait and see, and wait for us to all emerge from it.
Absolutely. So now we're going to have some questions and answers, if that's all right with you, if you're up for answering some questions.
Fine,
so
fine.
So if you have questions for Tim, please remember to use the Q&A button at the bottom right-hand side of the screen. So Mary, who's one of our council members, she says, your daughter Eva came to speak to us at the weekend conference some years ago and brought her little daughter with her. Has your granddaughter inherited yours and your mother's wonderful way with words?
Well, I'd like to think she has, because Martha is now 15 and she wrote a novel, which...
Really?
Yeah, which we haven't, I mean, she hasn't sent it off to an agent, but she should do. Not that I think it will be published, because it's probably, she wouldn't want it published, but it was really rather good. And I've got a copy here up on my desk of it printed out. And I was really very impressed by it. And I thought, if she can do that at 15, give her another 3 or 4 years. And, it's interesting, because in many art forms, you often get geniuses. I'm not saying Martha's a genius, but it makes you think, being she's only 15. It's like in music or mathematics or chess or something like that. You can find somebody age 6 who will be able to create something which is pretty impressive. That's not the case with books, novels. It's hardly ever, I don't think, I'm trying to think what the greatest novel ever written by a young person is. I mean, or rather, what's the youngest age at which anyone's written a great novel? And, you know, there've been, you know, things like, what was it called? I can't remember what it's called now. Mr. Saltino, who was the lady who wrote that? Daisy somebody. I should know this. Awful. Back in 1915, she was 9. It was a big sensation, but it was
Someone will know.
It was funny unintentionally. But Françoise Sagan wrote something, Bonjour Tristesse, when I think she was 18 or 17.
Okay.
But anything younger than that, I mean, I would struggle to find a child, which it would be technically, who's written a great novel. You've got to be, you know, once you get to 20, 21, then a lot of people have, but it's whereas music, you get people, you know, particularly in the pop field, writing really good stuff when they're only 15 or 16, and you think, wow. Or being able to play brilliantly, play guitar or piano, or at a very young age. But writing a novel requires much more experience and insight.
It's the experience and the insight into other people, isn't it?
And also a piece of music, whether it's written by Mozart or Johnny Rotten, a lot of it, it's really up to the listener to interpret what they think, and different people will get different things from the same piece of music. Doesn't mean to say it's a bad piece of music, but it does mean that the intentions of the composer, which may only have been to do a nice tune, they can mean a lot more to other people. Whereas in the novel, it's pretty specific. You can't just jumble words and fling them up in the air like you can with notes.
Yeah, and it's the conciseness. You're talking about that in music as well.
Yeah.
I was thinking while you were saying it, you really have to get rid of all the extra words and make sure every word is working, says exactly what you want it to do. It is absolutely that. So, right, you're popular. Everyone loves you. There are also going to be questions.
Oh,
right. Do you know if the Shadows were in Singapore in the 1950s, maybe national service, says Pamela? Do you know that? Because I know she was in Singapore, so I wonder.
No, I don't think for 1 minute. I'm sure I would have known if they'd done national service. I don't think they did. I know Bruce and Hank were only 16 or 17 when they got going, and they're only a tiny bit older than me, and I was too young for national service. So I'm 99% certain they would have mentioned it. No, they didn't do national service because their career was not interrupted.
Right. And she also says, when can we see Superstar on the London stage again?
Well, it was on the London stage, funnily enough, during lockdown, in the open air theatre, in Regent's Park. And it was great. I mean, there was a limited audience. You had to sit in groups of 2 and all apart from each other. But it was done in the Regent's Park about 2 years ago. And actually, it's been done 3 years running on that. It's been a great success. It's done a bit more like a concert, but it's great. It's, you know, you just, it's all there. It's acted brilliantly by the performers, but it doesn't have big confusing sets, but it looks terrific. It's like a great rock concert. So, but when it would next go into a theatre, just a regular theatre, I don't know. I mean, it turns up every so often, but it's always on somewhere, or it will be when COVID's over.
Yeah, finally. Right. Sylvia says, because she's a Society of History person, writing our book 10 years ago, The Woman Writer, I interviewed your mum, Joan, and spent the day there. I also had lunch with Eva and was happy when you sent me your signed book on Oh, What a Circus. I love it. And I know David Land's team and Dagenham Girl Pipers, etc. Some great memories of the Rice family. So she's, I think,
great. Good old Sylvia. Yeah. One of my grandchildren's called Sylvia. Good name.
Yeah, she does lots for us. So Simon says, I had the good fortune to get to know Norris McWhirter through the Freedom Association.
Yep.
And if I remember correctly, you spoke at his memorial service. Do you have any reminiscences of him or his twin brother Ross that you could share with us?
Well, I never met Ross, sad to say, because he was murdered shortly before I met Norris. And we had, my brother and I and Paul Gambaccini, and Mike Reed, we had this idea for a book which was the history of the charts, the pop charts, which was just a list, really, lists. And we thought, who would be the best publisher for this? And the answer, of course, was Guinness, because they sold millions of books which were just facts, and people love facts. I love facts, and I'll buy a book of facts on almost anything, even if I'm not interested in the subject. There's a limit, but to a certain extent. We took this idea to Guinness, and in fact, I think we rang. I rang them up, and I asked to speak to either Ross or Norris McWhirter, and I said I was Tim Rice from Jesus Christ Superstar fame and all that, which obviously got me through. And I was put through by chance, could have been either, to Norris. Yeah. And I told him, and he got it immediately. He said, yes, this is a very good idea. So send me your outline and we'll discuss it at the next board meeting. About 2 weeks later, Ross was murdered. Awful. Yeah. And, we thought, well, it's a tragedy and it doesn't really matter at all, but in comparison, obviously our book and everything, we assumed that the Guinness whole company might pack up. But Norris got in touch about 3 months later and said, look, this is absolute, this tragedy it isn't going to affect us. We're going to carry on, and quite right too. And we went in to meet the various people, including Norris, and we discussed the book, and they loved it, and we got it out, and it became a mega hit. We sold literally over 1 million books, I think, in the next 10, 15 years. I mean, it was just a history of the charts, and we didn't have opinions. We didn't say we think the Stones are better than the Beatles, or we don't think this number should have been number one. We just said it was number one, or it wasn't number one. It was not a book of reviews, and it's still used. I mean, to be honest, the charts these days, nobody knows what's going on in the charts. It's you can come in at number one and then drop to number 63 the next week. And I couldn't even tell you what's number one at the moment. But we lost interest in the charts, as did the rest of the world, as far as I could see. Definitely. In about 1993, and we gave up on it. But I don't even know if there's a chart book out at the moment. But you can get it all online. That's the problem.
Yeah, I mean, my kids are at that age where they're listening to music all the time, and they never talk about what sort of top of the charts or anything. Not like we did with top of the pops and things. No. I mean,
well, they wouldn't know because there's no pleasure or interest in owning a record these days. It's just a kind of permanent muzak in the background to their lives, which is a pity. And obviously, there's some good songs being written, and the live gigs are still going strong, but. The concept of going out and forking out to buy an album is almost dead. I mean, vinyl still sells quite well to nutters like me who are aged. But when the grand
You're
old,
only 55.
Of course. But when the someone like Neil Diamond, a great artist, goes to number one, it just means he's number one on vinyl. Which, I mean, Neil Diamond is a fantastic artist and deserves to be number one. But the streaming charts are, I don't know,
gone, haven't they?
Yeah.
So Jenny says, have you got any plans to work on a musical about COVID?
No, absolutely not. I do not think people need to be reminded of it.
You wouldn't be able to sing through the mask.
Yes, that's true. Yes, it would be murder for the. Yeah, it would be really dreary. It's one of the worst ideas I've ever heard. Which probably means it'll be a smash hit, because that's what people said about Superstar.
So Mary says, I think she's not going back to that person about Mr. Saltino, but she hasn't answered it. She just says Daisy someone, so which is what you said as well.
No, I wish I could remember the name. It's terrible.
Yeah, I don't think
it's a very famous book. It came out in 1915, roughly.
69-year-old book was The Young Visitors
by
Daisy Ashford. Yeah, she's added it at the bottom. Yeah.
The Young Visitors, spelt wrong. Visiters.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, that's it. Daisy Ashford. Well, she was great. She was 9, and I don't think she ever wrote anything else of any interest. But she wrote this book, and some bright spark got it published, and it was published really and sold because she was 9, and it was just funny, but it wasn't meant to be funny, so in a way it was a little bit unfair.
Yeah. So Reiner says he's in Brazil, so he says, is there any story or stories that you would still like to transform into a musical?
Yeah, I'm quite keen to do one on Machiavelli.
Oh, yes, I love him.
Yeah,
He's so interesting historically.
very interesting. Yeah, so I'm sort of working on that. Watch this space.
Oh, definitely, definitely. I'd be first in the queue for a ticket for that one.
And Machiavelli rhymes with quite a few words, but perhaps not very useful ones.
Is that where you start, the rhymes?
Yeah. Right.
No, that's brilliant. So I think we're up to 2:00. So thank you so much for being here today and for talking to us. I really appreciate it, Tim, and
Well,
I've really enjoyed it.
Well,
So,
I hope to come to an SWWJ thing in the flesh before too long.
yeah, that would be great. We'd love to see you.
Okay.
So that'd be great. And if you enjoyed today, then you may be interested in our other online events, especially our interview with Costa Award-winning author Freya North, which is happening at 1:00 on Thursday. So thanks.
Okay.
Yes. So thank you, everybody.
Great.
So thanks everyone. Yeah,
Not
for joining us today.
Thanks.
And
Thank
thank
everyone
you, Tim.
who listened. Okay, I shall leave you now.
Right. See you, everyone. Bye. Bye.